My wife put divorce papers in front of me with a smirk. I signed without hesitation and told her finally. The look on her face told me she never saw that coming. Weeks later, she was at my door with nowhere to go, asking for help from the man she thought she'd already beaten. My name is Patrick Greer. I'm 45 years old, and I've spent the better part of my adult life building things. Literally. I'm a senior construction supervisor, the guy who shows up before sunrise, reads the blueprints, yells at the concrete crew when they're off by an inch, and doesn't leave the site until everything checks out. I've managed projects worth tens of millions of dollars. I know how to spot when a foundation has a problem before anyone else does. Funny thing is, I completely missed the fractures in my own house. Lynette and I met when I was 24. She was 23, working the front desk at a dental office, and she had this laugh that you could hear from across a parking lot. I was hooked fast. We got married 2 years later, and I thought I had it all figured out. We were happy, genuinely happy, for years. I worked hard. She kept the house running. And when our son Brody came along, I felt like I'd built something real. Something that mattered. Brody is 18 now. He finished high school last spring and left for state in August, studying civil engineering. Following in his old man's footsteps, which I won't lie, made me proud enough to tear up a little at his orientation. That kid is solid. Always has been. Then came Jake. Lynette got pregnant when Brody was 15, and I'd be lying if I said it wasn't a surprise. We hadn't exactly planned it, but I roll with it the way I roll with everything. You adapt, you adjust, and you make it work. Jake arrived 2.5 years ago, and I held that boy in the delivery room, and I loved him. I loved him the way you love something completely vulnerable that needs you. But something nagged at me from the beginning, something I kept pushing down. Jake doesn't look like me. Not in the obvious ways. Not in the ways that would set off alarms. But I'm a guy who notices details. It's literally my job. And from the time Jake was about a year old, there was this low-grade unease I couldn't shake. I told myself I was being paranoid. Lynette had been different during that pregnancy. More distant, more guarded. But I chalked it up to stress. She was 40, after all. A surprise pregnancy at 40 is not exactly a walk in the park. Meanwhile, I kept working. Long hours, long weeks. I was supervising a massive commercial development out in Ridgefield, about 40 minutes from our home in Clarksville, Tennessee. 12-hour days were normal. Sometimes 16. I'd come home, eat whatever was left on the stove, and fall into bed. Lynette said she understood. She said the right things. But she stopped asking how my day went. And her phone started going everywhere with her, to the bathroom, to the bedroom, face down on the kitchen counter. She started going out more. Girls' nights, she called them. A fitness class on Thursdays. A new friend named Amanda I never actually met. I noticed all of it. I just didn't want to believe what I was noticing. The moment that ended my denial was a Tuesday in September. I was at Jake's 18-month pediatric checkup. Lynette had asked me to take him because she had a work thing. The pediatrician, Dr. Calloway, was running through Jake's blood work and mentioned his blood type in passing. Type AB. I'm type O. Lynette is type A. I sat there while Dr. Calloway kept talking, and I heard exactly none of it. Because I knew enough basic biology to understand what type AB meant when both parents were O and A respectively. I drove home with Jake in the back seat, his little hand wrapped around a toy truck, completely oblivious. I put him down for a nap, then sat at the kitchen table alone and stared at the wall for a long time. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. I just made a decision. I was going to find out exactly what was going on, and I was going to be ready for whatever I found. I ordered the DNA test kit online that same night. Private lab, discreet packaging, results in 7 to 10 business days. I used my work email and had it shipped to the job site office in Ridgefield. Nobody questions packages at a construction site. Half the time there are 3 or 4 deliveries a day. Nobody was going to notice. While I waited, I did what I always do when I'm dealing with a problem I can't fix immediately. I worked. I showed up at 6 every morning, walked the site, checked the framing on the east wing, signed off on inspections. I kept my face neutral and my voice steady. My crew of 32 men had no idea their supervisor was quietly coming apart on the inside. But I wasn't just waiting. I was looking. I started going through our joint bank statements online, something I hadn't done carefully in months, maybe longer. I'm not proud of that. I'd gotten lazy with the finances, trusting Lynette to manage the household accounts while I focused on a job. Big mistake. What I found made my stomach drop. Over the past 14 months, there had been a pattern of cash withdrawals, always between $300 and $700, always on days when Lynette told me she was running errands or meeting a friend. 17 withdrawals in total. I added them up twice. $8,000 for $100. Gone. No corresponding purchases in any of our accounts. No receipts. No explanation. I sat with that number for a long time. Then I dug deeper. I pulled up the credit card statements and found 2 charges to a hotel in Nashville, a Marriott downtown, both on weeknights, about 8 months apart. The first one, I'd been working a night shift inspection in Ridgefield. The second one, Lynette had told me she was staying at her sister's in Murfreesboro because her sister had been sick. I remember that weekend. I'd asked her how Karen was feeling. She'd said better. Thanks for asking. I closed the laptop and went to bed. I didn't sleep. The DNA kit arrived at the site 9 days after I ordered it. I collected samples from Jake during bath time that Friday evening. Lynette was out at what she called a book club, which I now understood meant something else entirely. Jake laughed and splashed water at me while I swabbed his cheek, completely happy, completely unaware. I sent the samples back the next morning using the prepaid envelope. 6 days later, the results came to my email at 7:14 in the morning. I was already at the site. I read the notification subject line. Your DNA test results are ready. And I sat in my truck in the parking lot for 3 full minutes before I opened it. Not his biological father. I read it twice. Then I put my phone in my pocket, got out of the truck, and walked onto the site. I ran that day's entire safety briefing without a single word out of place. Nobody knew. That's the thing about being the guy in charge. You learn to carry weight where it doesn't show. That evening I call my father. Frank Greer is 72 years old and lives 40 minutes outside of Clarksville in a house he built himself back in 1981. He spent 30 years as a pipe fitter before his knees gave out, and he is the least dramatic person I have ever known. When I drove out there and sat at his kitchen table and told him everything, the blood type, the test, the hotel charges, the cash, he didn't flinch. He poured us both a cup of coffee, set the pot back on the burner, and was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How long have you known something was wrong?" I thought about it honestly. "Probably 2 years," I admitted. He nodded slowly, like that confirmed something he'd already suspected. "You always did let things go too long before you fixed them," he said. "Remember that beam problem on the Henderson job? You saw it in March and didn't pull the wall until June." That was my father. No yelling, no dramatics, just straight to the point. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "I'm going to be smart about it," I told him. "I'm not going to blow up. I'm going to talk to a lawyer first." He gave me a single nod, the kind that means good. Then he said, "Don't let her know you know. Not yet. People make mistakes when they think they're still ahead." I drove home that night with my father's words sitting in my chest like ballast. Steady. Grounding. The next morning I called Diana Rourke. A colleague of mine at the firm had used her 2 years prior during a property dispute. He'd said she was sharp as a blade and twice as calm. Her office was in downtown Nashville, and she agreed to see me that Thursday. When I sat across from her desk and laid out everything, the test results, the bank records, the hotel charges, she didn't look surprised. She just listened, made notes in a yellow legal pad, and when I finished she looked up and said, "You did the right thing coming here," before saying a word to her. "What's my position?" I asked. "Strong," she said. "Much stronger than she's counting on." She leaned back in her chair. "Here's what I want you to do. Keep acting normal. Let her believe she's running this show. While she thinks she's setting the table, we're going to quietly move every piece off of it." I walked out of Diana's office that afternoon feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks. In control. The Thursday after I met with Diana, I was on site reviewing steel delivery paperwork when my phone rang. Brody's name lit up the screen. He usually called on Sunday evenings. That was our routine since he'd left for state. A Thursday afternoon call in October meant something was off. I stepped away from the crew and answered. "Hey, Dad." His voice was flat, not his normal voice. "Brody, what's going on?" There was a pause, the kind that tells you someone is trying to figure out how to say something they've been carrying around for a while. Then he said, "I came home last weekend. Surprise visit. I didn't tell Mom I was coming." I kept my voice completely even. "Okay." She wasn't home. I let myself in with my key, and I was going to wait, but I got bored and grabbed her iPad off the counter to watch something. Another pause. "Dad, She wasn't logged out of her messages. I walked further from the crew, toward the fence line at the edge of the site. What did you see? Enough. His voice was tight. There's some guy named Matt. It looked like it had been going on for a while. I didn't read all of it. I put it down pretty fast. But what I saw was enough. He stopped. Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't know if I should call you or... You did exactly right, I said. You called me. That's what you should have done. Are you okay? I looked out across the job site, at the steel frame rising against the gray Tennessee sky, at the crew moving efficiently below, at everything orderly and measurable and under control. I'm okay, I told him. I need you to do something for me. Don't say anything to your mother. Don't change how you talk to her, or how often you call. Can you do that? Yeah, he said quietly. I can do that. And Brody, none of this changes anything between you and me. Not one thing. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, I know, Dad. His voice had something in it I hadn't heard before. Not a boy's voice anymore. Something steadier than that. I hung up, stood at that fence line for 60 seconds, then walked back to my crew and spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing load calculations like nothing had happened. That evening I called Diana and told her about Brody's call. She said it was useful confirmation, but advised me to keep Brody out of any legal proceedings if possible. He's 18, she said. Let him be the son, not the witness. I agreed. Then Diana told me something I hadn't been expecting. While pulling public records as part of her standard pre-filing research, her paralegal had found something interesting about Matt. Full name, Matthew Allen Kowalski, 41 years old, currently residing at 4412 Birchwood Drive in Hendersonville, which was his mother's address. He had no property in his name, a leased vehicle, and credit card debt totaling somewhere north of $60,000, based on 2 judgments filed against him in Davidson County over the past 3 years. I sat with that for a moment. So she's planning to leave a paid-off house and a stable income, I said, for a guy who lives with his mother and owes $60,000. Diana's voice was dry. It happens more often than you'd think. She also flagged something that hit harder than the Matt information. Her paralegal had pulled a report from the private investigator I'd authorized her to hire the week prior. The investigator had done background checks and cross-referenced some financial records. The conclusion: the man most likely to be Jake's biological father was not Matt Kowalski. There was a third person, a man named Roger Delacroix, 44 years old, married, father of 3, working as a senior project estimator at a competing construction firm in Nashville. He and Lynette had apparently overlapped at an industry networking event about 3 years ago. I had to read that paragraph of the report twice. Matt wasn't even the right man. Lynette hadn't just betrayed me once. She'd been running 2 separate situations while I was working 12-hour days to pay the mortgage. I drove to my father's house that night without calling ahead. Frank was on his back porch with a cup of coffee, watching the tree line go dark. I sat down across from him and told him about Delacroix. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "What are you going to do with that?" "I'm going to use it," I said. "Legally. Through Diana." He gave me a slow nod. "Good. Keep it clean. You win clean, or you don't win right." I drove home and went to sleep at 9:30. The best sleep I'd had in weeks. 3 weeks after I met with Diana, I was ready. The paperwork was tight. The prenuptial agreement we'd signed before our wedding, the one Lynette had complained about at the time, but signed anyway, was fully in order. Diana had reviewed it 3 times. The deed to the house on Sycamore Ridge Road was solely in my name, a fact Lynette had likely forgotten, because it had been that way for 4 years following a refinance I'd handled while she was visiting her sister in Florida. The joint accounts had been strategically adjusted. The documentation on the unauthorized cash withdrawals and the hotel charges had been organized and filed. I was ready. She just didn't know it. It was a Saturday morning. I was at the kitchen counter drinking coffee when Lynette came downstairs in her robe, moving with the kind of deliberate energy that meant she'd been rehearsing something. She sat down at the kitchen table, placed a manila folder in front of her, and looked at me with an expression she'd clearly practiced: firm, sad, composed. I recognized a performance when I saw one. She slid the folder across the table toward me. Inside was a packet of divorce papers, already filled out with her information at the top. "Patrick," she said, "I think it's time we were honest with each other. I think we both know this hasn't been working for a long time." She folded her hands. "I've spoken to a lawyer. I think this is the right thing for both of us." I picked up the folder. I opened it. I looked at the papers inside, and then I did something she clearly had not prepared herself for. I smiled. Not a polite smile. Not a nervous smile. A slow, genuine, deeply relieved smile. The kind that comes from a man who's been waiting for exactly this moment and is glad it's finally arrived. Finally, I said. Lynette's composure slipped. Just slightly. A flicker behind her eyes. A barely visible hesitation. What? I reached for a pen from the counter behind me, clicked it open, and signed my name at the bottom of the first page without reading another word. Then I set the pen down and slid the folder back across the table to her. The look on her face told me everything. She had expected resistance, or grief, or anger. Anything except the calm satisfaction of a man who'd already done his homework. She'd walked into this kitchen, thinking she was the one surprising me. Instead, she was looking at someone who hadn't been surprised in weeks. That's it, she managed. That's it, I said, and took a sip of my coffee. She straightened up, trying to recover. I'm thinking it makes the most sense for me to stay in the house while everything is being finalized. I set my mug down. That's not going to work. Her eyes narrowed. Excuse me. The house, Lynette. It's in my name. Only my name. Has been since the refinance in 2020. I kept my voice completely level. You can check the deed if you'd like. Diana Rourke's office has a copy. The color shifted in her face. Ew, that's not. And before you bring up the split of assets, I continued, leaning forward slightly, I'd like you to take a look at something. I pulled a folded document from my back pocket, the prenuptial agreement, and placed it flat on the table between us. You signed this. We both did. What's mine stays mine. The courts are going to agree. She stared at the document. Her hands, which had been so carefully folded moments ago, were now pressed flat against the table. You can't just. I'm not just anything, I said quietly. I'm the guy who built this life. I'm the guy who paid this mortgage for 17 years. And I'm the guy who's been waiting, patiently, for you to make your next move. I stood up and picked up my coffee mug. You made it. Now we move forward. I walked out of the kitchen and left her sitting there with her carefully prepared divorce papers and absolutely no plan B. Diana called me on a Wednesday morning while I was doing a walkthrough on the East Wing framing. I stepped off to the side and she got straight to it. The way she always did. No preamble, no softening. The private investigator had finished his full report on Matt Kowalski. I already knew the broad strokes. Lived with his mother in Hendersonville. Debt north of $60,000. No property. But the complete picture was something else entirely. Matt was 41 years old and had never held a job longer than 2.5 years. He'd worked in sales, then in insurance, then briefly as a gym manager before that folded. He currently listed himself on social media as a business consultant, which the investigator noted appeared to mean he had no current employment of record. The two judgments against him in Davidson County were from a credit card company and a former landlord. The landlord one was particularly telling. He'd been evicted from an apartment in Antioch 3 years ago for non-payment, which was right around the time he apparently moved back to his mother's house on Birchwood Drive. His car was a leased Audi. Of course it was. Diana also confirmed what her paralegal had flagged earlier about Roger Delacroix. The man her investigator believed was actually Jake's biological father. Delacroix was a senior project estimator at Tanner and Reed Construction in Nashville. Married 14 years, 3 kids, active in his church community, coached his son's Little League team. By every outward measure, a completely respectable life. I thought about that for a moment. A man with 3 kids of his own, coaching Little League, while my wife was carrying a child in my house. What do I do with Delacroix? I asked Diana. For now, nothing, she said. His biological connection to Jake is relevant to the paternity dispute, but we don't need to confront him directly to use it legally. The DNA results name him. That's enough. And the paternity dispute itself. We filed to formally contest it as part of the divorce proceedings. Tennessee law allows it. Given that you have the DNA results, the blood type documentation, and the timeline the investigator established, the court will almost certainly rule in your favor. She paused. I want to be honest with you. Patrick, there's a chance the judge may still consider you a de facto parent given the time you've spent with Jake. But the financial obligation, the legal paternity, that's what we're contesting. And I believe we win that. I leaned against the site fence and looked out at the steel frame of the building I'd been supervising for 7 months. Every beam in that structure was where it was because someone had measured it, checked it, and verified it before committing to it. File it, I said. That evening I did something I've been putting off. I sat down at my kitchen table while Lynette was at one of her increasingly frequent evening outings, and I called Brody. He answered on the second ring. Dad. Hey, bud. You got a few minutes? Yeah, of course. I told him, carefully, and only what he needed to know, that I'd gotten the DNA results and that Jake was not biologically mine. I told him that I was handling it through Diana, that the divorce was moving forward, and that there was nothing for him to worry about on my end. There was a long silence. Then Brody said, Dad, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. You've got nothing to be sorry for, I told him. I know. He stopped. Then, how are you holding up? For real. For real. I thought about it honestly. I'm steady. I'm not going to pretend it doesn't hurt, because it does. But I'm not lost. I know what I'm doing. He was quiet for another beat. Good, he said. That's what I needed to hear. After I hung up, I sat at that table for a while. Not spiraling. Not replaying everything. Just sitting. There's a kind of grief that doesn't announce itself loudly. It just settles in your chest like weight. I let it sit there. Then I got up, made dinner, and went to bed. 3 days later, Diana filed the paternity contest and the asset documentation simultaneously. Lynette's attorney received the paperwork on a Friday afternoon. I was on a job site in Ridgefield when Diana texted me. Filed. The other side now knows what you have. I read the message, put my phone in my pocket, and went back to work. The Monday after Diana filed, Lynette came home at 7 in the evening and found every item that was exclusively hers. Her clothes, her personal belongings, her collection of decorative candles she insisted on keeping in every single room of the house, packed into boxes and stacked neatly along the wall near the front door. I was sitting on the couch reading when she walked in. She stopped in the doorway and stared at the boxes. Then she stared at me. What did you do? Her voice was carefully controlled but tight underneath. Getting a head start, I said, setting my book down. You asked for a divorce. No point dragging out the logistics. I still live here, Patrick. For now, I said. But I want to be transparent with you. The house is mine. The lease agreement has only my name on it from the 2018 renewal, and Diana's office has already confirmed that your legal standing here as a co-resident ended the moment you filed. I kept my tone completely even. You've got 2 weeks to make arrangements. That's more than fair. Her composure held for another few seconds. Then it didn't. You think this is fair? She said, her voice rising. I have a 2-year-old, Patrick. You can't just pack my things and give me a deadline like I'm a tenant. You have a 2-year-old, I agreed. And I'm working with Diana to ensure appropriate arrangements are made for Jake's care and living situation. The process will be handled through the court, not through whatever you'd hope to work out informally. I stood up. What I'm not going to do is let you stay in this house rent-free while your attorney tries to claim half of everything I built. She stepped closer, her eyes hard. You can't keep me from Jake. I'll fight you on that. Fight away, I said. But while you're doing that, keep in mind that Diana has the bank records, the hotel charges, the investigator's report. I held her gaze. All of it. That landed. I watched it land. She shifted her weight slightly, a small movement, but I'd learned to read her. That was Lynette recalibrating. What hotel charges? The Marriott downtown, I said. Twice. Once when I was working a night shift, and once when you told me you were at Karen's in Murfreesboro. I tilted my head slightly. How is Karen, by the way? The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. I also know about the money, I continued. $8,400 in cash withdrawals over 14 months. Diana has every transaction documented. I picked up my book again. I've known for a while, Lynette. I've just been waiting for the right moment to show my hand. She stood in the middle of the living room without speaking for a long moment. Then she said, quietly, what about Jake? And there it was. The real question. Not the money, not the house, Jake. I set the book down again and looked at her directly. I love that boy, I said, and I meant every word of it. I have loved him since the day he was born. Nothing about what's in those documents changes that in my heart. I kept my voice steady. But I'm not going to be legally named as the biological father of a child who isn't mine, and I'm not going to pay support on that basis. The truth is going to come out in that courtroom, Lynette. It's already in the filing. She closed her eyes for a moment. You should go, I said. Not tonight. I'm not asking you to leave tonight. But you need to start making plans. Because in 2 weeks, the locks are changing. I picked up my book. She stood there for another minute. Then I heard her footsteps on the stairs. I didn't follow her up. I sat there, and I thought about Jake asleep in his room. That little face, those chubby hands, the way he'd laughed during bath time while I took the DNA sample. And I felt something complicated and heavy and completely honest. I wasn't going to run from it. I wasn't going to pretend. But I wasn't going to carry a lie forever either. Diana had advised me to let the legal process handle Roger Delacroix. She was right, professionally speaking. The DNA results named him. The court would handle the paternity question without me ever having to say a word to the man directly. I let 2 weeks pass after the filing. I let Garrett's office send 3 increasingly agitated letters to Diana, Lynette's attorney. I let Lynette move through the house with the tight, coiled energy of someone who was furiously recalculating everything she thought she knew about her position. And then one Tuesday evening, I picked up the phone and called Roger Delacroix anyway. Not out of anger. Not to threaten him or blow up his life or cause a scene. I called him because I needed to say one thing to him directly, man to man, and then I needed to be done with it. He answered on the 4th ring. His voice was cautious. He'd probably seen an unknown number and almost hadn't picked up. Roger Delacroix, I said. My name is Patrick Greer. I think you know why I'm calling. A long pause. Then, very quietly, yes. I'm not going to make this complicated, I said. I have the DNA results. My attorney has them. The court is going to have them. I'm not calling to threaten you or negotiate with you. I kept my voice even and steady, the same voice I use when I'm telling a subcontractor something that is not up for debate. I'm calling to tell you that there is a 2.5-year-old boy who is going to need a father. I'm not going to be that father legally. That means the responsibility is going to land on you. I suggest you start figuring out what that looks like. Another silence. Then he said, I didn't know. I'm not interested in what you didn't know, I said. I'm interested in what you do going forward. That boy didn't ask for any of this. I hung up. I sat at the kitchen table for a minute. Not triumphant. Not relieved. Just done with that particular piece of it. The next thing that needed handling was Matt. Diana had already flagged the $8,400 in cash withdrawals as evidence of marital asset dissipation. That was the legal term, and it was a strong one in Tennessee divorce proceedings. But 2 days after the filing, her paralegal discovered something additional that changed the picture significantly. Going back through credit card records, there were 3 charges to an account Lynette had opened in her maiden name, an account I hadn't known existed. Total balance transferred out over the past 8 months, $23,000. The charges lined up with dates when Matt had allegedly needed help with bills, a car payment, and what appeared to be a cash transfer to a Venmo account registered to Matthew A. Kowalski. I called Diana the moment she forwarded me the documentation. This changes the asset picture considerably, she said. $23,000 from a marital period account, transferred to a third party, is not going to sit well with a judge. Combined with the $8,000 in cash withdrawals, we're looking at over $30,000 in documented dissipation. How does that affect the proceedings? It means the court is likely to view any financial claim she makes with significant skepticism, Diana said. Her attorney knows this now. That's why you're getting 3 letters a week. 2 days after that conversation, something happened that I hadn't anticipated. Matt disappeared. Not literally. He didn't vanish off the face of the earth. But Lynette came downstairs on a Thursday morning looking like she hadn't slept, sat at the kitchen table with her coffee going cold in front of her, and said nothing for 20 minutes. I came through, poured my own coffee, and asked casually if everything was all right. She looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. Not anger, not calculation, just the raw, exposed look of someone who's just had the floor pulled out from under them. Matt's not. We're not. She stopped. Started again. He changed his number. I didn't say anything. He stopped returning my calls, and then his number was disconnected, and she pressed her lips together. I picked up my coffee mug. I'm sorry to hear that, I said. I'm in it. In the detached way, you mean something that was always inevitable. Then I walked out of the kitchen and left her sitting there. That evening I called Brody. He answered immediately. I told him about the $23,000, about Matt disappearing, about where things stood with Diana. I kept it factual and calm. When I finished, Brody was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She sent me a letter, Dad. Your mother." "Yeah, last week. 3 pages. She explained everything. Or tried to. Said she was confused. Said she'd made mistakes. Said she hoped I'd understand someday." He paused. "I haven't written back. That's your call to make," I told him. "Completely yours." "I know," he said. I'm not ready. Maybe someday. But not right now." Another pause. "I brought the letter to your house. I left it in your mailbox. I thought you should read it." I went out to the mailbox after we hung up. The envelope was there, sealed, Brody's name and Lynette's handwriting on the front. He'd slid it in unopened, returned to sender in its own way. I brought it inside, set it on the counter, and looked at it for a long time. Then I put it in the kitchen drawer and left it there. Not because I was afraid of what was in it, but because some things don't need to be read to be understood. Jake turned 3 on a Thursday in November. I knew the date was coming. I've been aware of it the way you're aware of a storm system moving in. You track it on the horizon, you make your preparations, and you decide in advance how you're going to handle it when it arrives. Lynette had moved out 11 days earlier. She was renting a 1-bedroom apartment in East Nashville. Temporary, her attorney had told Diana, while she figured out her next steps. She'd taken her boxes, her car, and whatever arrangements she'd cobbled together for Jake's care during the transition. The house felt different without them. Quieter. Not empty exactly, just clear to something that had been taking up space. Jake's birthday fell on a Thursday, which was one of Lynette's custody days under the interim agreement Diana had negotiated. I had him Mondays, Wednesdays, and every other weekend, an arrangement that was temporary pending the final divorce decree, but one the court had approved. I could have found a reason to stop by. It was his birthday. Nobody would have questioned it. I didn't go. It wasn't cruelty. It wasn't indifference. It was the hardest kind of decision, the kind where you know that what feels right in the moment is not what's right for the long term. Diana had been clear. Showing up at Lynette's apartment uninvited on a custody day, even for a birthday, would muddy the legal waters. It would signal to the court that the boundaries weren't being respected. And right now, the legal proceedings were the only thing standing between me and a judgment that would cost me far more than one birthday visit. So instead, I drove to my father's house. Frank was in the garage when I pulled up, working on a small engine repair, a neighbor's lawn mower, something he did occasionally just to keep his hands busy. He looked up when he heard my truck. "Thought you might come by today," he said. I sat down on the workbench stool and watched him work for a while without saying anything. The garage smelled like oil and metal and sawdust, the same smell it had had my entire life. There was something grounding about it. After a few minutes, Frank set down the wrench and looked at me. "How are you holding up?" "It's his birthday," I said. "I should be there." "Yeah," Frank said simply. "You should, and you're not. And that's because of choices she made, not choices you made." He picked the wrench back up. "That doesn't make it easier. But it's true." We stayed in that garage for 2 hours. He finished the lawn mower. I helped him reorganize the tool wall, something we'd been meaning to do for months. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. On my way home, I stopped at a toy store and bought Jake a wooden train set, the kind with the magnetic connectors and the little painted bridges. I brought it home and put it in the closet in the second bedroom. For Wednesday, when he'd be back with me. That night my phone rang at 9:47. Unknown number. I answered. It was Lynette. She'd been crying. I could hear her in the first syllable. Her voice was tight and small in a way I'd never heard from her before. "Patrick," she said. I needed to say something." I sat down on the edge of the bed. "I'm listening." "He's 3, she said. He blew out his candles, and he asked where you were, and I didn't know what to tell him." A shaky exhale. "I told him you'd see him soon. He said okay, and then he went back to his cake." She stopped. I don't think I understood what I was doing. I don't think I understood what I was actually taking apart until it was already apart. I didn't say anything for a moment. "I hear you," I said finally. "Patrick." "Lynette," I said. "I'm glad you called. I'm glad you said that. But it's 2 weeks too late and $30,000 too late and a DNA test too late." My voice stayed quiet. Not harsh. Just honest. Jake asked where I was. "I'll be there Wednesday. That's what I can give you right now." A long silence. Then, "Okay," she said, barely above a whisper. "Good night, Lynette." I put the phone down and sat in the quiet of the house for a long time. Outside, a November wind was moving through the trees along Sycamore Ridge. Inside, it was still. I thought about Jake at a birthday table asking where I was. And I let myself feel every bit of that. The court date was set for the second Thursday in December. Diana had spent the previous 3 weeks preparing with the kind of focused precision that reminded me of the best project managers I'd worked with over the years. People who thought 10 steps ahead, anticipated every objection, and walked into a room knowing more than everyone else in it. I trusted her completely. That trust had been earned. The morning of the hearing, I put on my good charcoal suit, the one I wore to project milestone presentations and pre-construction meetings with city inspectors. I wasn't going to walk into that courtroom looking like a man who'd been beaten down. I shaved, made coffee, and drove downtown to Nashville in the kind of focused quiet that I used to settle myself before difficult days on the job. Lynette was already there when I arrived, sitting with her attorney, a man named Garrett, mid-40s, the kind of lawyer who compensated for a weak case with a loud voice. Lynette was dressed carefully. Her eyes met mine across the room for 1 second, then dropped. I sat down next to Diana, and she leaned over and said quietly, "We're in good shape. Let me do the talking." I nodded. That was the plan. Garrett led off with Lynette's position, that she was entitled to equitable distribution of marital assets, that she had been the primary caregiver for both children during the marriage, and that the paternity contest was punitive and without merit. He was smooth about it. I'd give him that. Diana took him apart piece by piece. She entered the prenuptial agreement, signed and notarized, fully enforceable under Tennessee law. She entered the property deed, solely in my name since the 2020 refinance. She entered the bank records, $8,400 in cash withdrawals over 14 months. She entered the discovery of the secondary account in Lynette's maiden name, $23,000 transferred to a third party over 8 months. She entered the hotel receipts. She entered the investigator's report. Then she entered the DNA results. The judge, a woman in her late 50s, reading glasses on, who gave absolutely nothing away with her expression, reviewed each document in turn. Garrett objected 3 times. The judge sustained none of them. On the paternity question, the judge noted that Tennessee Code annotated 36-2-304 allowed for rebuttal of the presumption of paternity with clear and convincing evidence. The DNA results, she said, constituted exactly that. The biological father of record was to be corrected to reflect the actual findings. My legal paternity was formally dissolved. On the asset question, the judge reviewed the prenuptial agreement, found it enforceable, and ruled accordingly. The house remained mine. My personal savings remained mine. The marital joint account, what was left of it after the cash withdrawals and unauthorized transfers, was to be split, but given the documented dissipation, Lynette's share was reduced proportionally. Garrett made a final push for spousal support. The judge looked at him over her reading glasses and said she was not inclined to award support to a party who had demonstrably dissipated marital assets. She gave Lynette 30 days to vacate any remaining personal property from the house. It was over in 2 hours and 14 minutes. Diana gathered her files and said, without ceremony, "That went about as well as it could have." She shook my hand. "You were patient and you were prepared. That's what won this." I walked out of the courthouse into a cold December afternoon. The sky was the kind of clear, sharp blue that only comes in winter. I stood on the steps for a moment and breathed it in. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel like celebrating. What I felt was clean, like a job site after the last inspection has been passed, and the paperwork has been signed, and you can finally move to the next phase. I called Brody from the parking garage. "It's done," I told him. A pause. Then, "How did it go?" "The way it was supposed to," I said. "The house is mine." The paternity ruling went our way. Diana was outstanding. "Dad," he said, and then he didn't say anything else for a moment. Just that one word, with everything in it. "Good," he finally said. "That's really good. How are your finals going?" I asked. He laughed. A surprised, genuine laugh. The kind that comes when someone asks a completely normal question in the middle of an abnormal moment. "I've got 2 left," he said. "Structural analysis and thermodynamics." "Call me after thermodynamics," I said. "We'll get dinner when you're home for Christmas." "Deal," he said. I drove home, changed out of the charcoal suit, and went out to the garage. I spent 2 hours organizing my tools, pulling everything off the wall, cleaning each one, hanging it back in its proper place. It was something I did when I needed to feel order under my hands. When I came inside, the house was quiet and fully mine. Brody came home for Christmas break on a Saturday evening, arriving in the used pickup truck he'd bought the previous summer with money he'd earned working on a framing crew. He pulled into the driveway, got out, and we shook hands and then hugged, the solid, brief kind of hug that men who don't need to perform their affection give each other. He looked good, taller somehow, or maybe just straighter. College was agreeing with him. We spent Christmas quietly, just the two of us, Frank driving up from outside Clarksville to join us for Christmas dinner. My father ate 2 helpings of the roast beef I'd made, complimented the gravy twice, and told Brody that studying engineering was the second best decision a man could make. When Brody asked what the first was, Frank said, "Knowing your own mind." Then he drank his coffee and didn't elaborate, because Frank never did. For days after Christmas, Brody and I drove east into the Smokies. We'd talked about doing a winter hike for a couple of years and never gotten around to it. Now we had the time, and we had the reason. I packed the truck the night before, tent, sleeping bags rated to 15 degrees, cooking gear, 2 days of food. We left at 5 in the morning with thermoses of coffee and the truck heater running full blast. We hit the trailhead at Gregory Bald before 9 and started up. The trail was quiet in winter, no crowds, no day hikers, just the cold and the bare trees and the sound of our boots on frozen ground. The elevation gain was gradual at first, then steady, and we fell into the kind of hiking rhythm where talking becomes natural because you're both looking forward and there's no pressure in it. We talked about Brody's courses, about the structural engineering professor he respected and the one he didn't. We talked about the framing crew he'd worked with over the summer, guys twice his age who'd taught him more in 3 months than he'd expected. We talked about what he wanted to do after graduation. We didn't talk about Lynette. Not directly. Not because it was off limits, but because there was nothing left to say about it that hadn't already been said. That chapter was closed. The pages were dry. We set up camp just below the Bald in the early afternoon, in a sheltered spot with a clear line of sight to the west. The temperature was dropping, and the sky had gone the deep pewter color that meant weather was coming in. We got the tent up fast and built a fire in the stone ring from deadfall we collected along the edge of the clearing. That night we sat by the fire with 10 mugs of hot coffee and the dark pressing in around the edges of the firelight, and Brody said, out of nowhere, "I'm proud of you, Dad." I looked at him across the fire. "I mean it," he said. "The way you handled everything. You didn't fall apart. You didn't do anything stupid. You handled it." I thought about that for a moment. About the nights at the kitchen table. About Diana's office in the courthouse and the call to Delacroix. About Jake's birthday and the toy train in the closet, which I'd given him on the first Wednesday visit after the hearing, watching him sit on the floor and connect the pieces with complete, absorbed concentration. I had good people in my corner, I said. You, Frank, Diana. Yeah, Brody said. But you still had to be the one to carry it. We sat with that for a while. The fire popped and shifted. An owl called somewhere in the dark trees above us. "What happens now?" Brody asked. "We build something new," I said. "That's what you do after a job site gets cleared. You build something new on it." He nodded slowly, looking into the fire. Then he said, "I like that." We turned in around 10. I lay in my sleeping bag listening to the wind move through the ridge above us, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not happiness exactly, not yet, but the solid, reliable predecessor to it. The sense that the ground under you is level and real, and you know exactly what you're standing on. The next morning we woke to 2 inches of snow on the tent fly and a sky that had gone clean and white. We made oatmeal on the camp stove and ate it standing up, watching the ridge come into focus as the light grew. Brody looked out at it and said, "Not bad. Not bad at all." I agreed. We broke camp, shouldered our packs, and started back down the mountain. Father and son, 2 men who knew where they stood with each other, walking forward through a cold, bright morning with the whole trail ahead of them.